If Oregon wants a playoff-worthy defense this year, Bryce Boettcher and one of my favorite guys on the team have to be big.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time. Once again, for Locked On Ducks, I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Lots coming up on today's show. More chatter I had with Brian Smith because we talk about culture. What even is culture? Oregon's is pretty good. What's going to happen with basketball? Boy, there are a lot of different ways that can go. That's all on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends over at 5 Hour Energy. Head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from. If you need one now, you can grab a 5 Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. Stock up today and stay energized. So, Bryce Boettcher was a part of the media appearances for Oregon at spring practice this week. He, like most people, didn't say a ton. I do find it interesting because he's not able to play baseball. He's got one more year of eligibility for football. He's back this year. He was Oregon's leading tackler a season ago. He's talking about how his body is able to kind of be a bit bulkier, and he's just focusing on football a little bit more. I think he said he takes some swings just for the love of the game. And, of course, he was drafted by the Houston Astros into MLB. So maybe that's the direction he ends up going. But I'm certainly glad that he's back, or else the linebacker position would be a pretty precarious spot from a depth chart standpoint. I still think that's the most likely spot Oregon would add a transfer if they did in the spring portal. More on that coming later on today's show. But Bryce Boettcher has to be huge, not just because you'd like to see him repeat the tackling season he had last year. He had 94 tackles, which was the most on Oregon's team. The next closest, by the way, was Tysheem Johnson, and the next closest was Kobe Savage at 67 and 64. He had 30 more tackles than the guy who had the third most tackles on Oregon's defense last year. So that's reason number one. The production has to be there once again because it was there a year ago, and you're going to need that without Jeffrey Bassa there. And so he was the second most, Boettcher was the second most snap linebacker for Oregon last year. Bassa, even though he was injured, still played more. And we saw Devin Jackson have a huge role, Justin Jacobs not quite as much. But production's one thing, leadership is another. I talked about the youth of this Oregon team. It's very true on defense. There are some veteran guys. Bryce Boettcher is one of those guys. And this is the second reason why I look at him and say he has to have a big time year for Oregon's defense to be at a playoff level, because you don't just need someone who can fly all over the field, make a couple of sacks and make a bunch of tackles as well like he did last year. But Bryce Boettcher was a leader on the defense. Now I think he's the leader on the defense. Jeff Bassa was a guy last year who had the communication piece in his helmet that was getting the defensive play calls in from Tosh Lupoi. That's probably, I would guess, maybe it'll be Devin Jackson. I'd guess that'll be Bryce Boettcher this year. And he was awesome last year. He's a veteran of the program. I think that he's an excellent candidate to do that. I'd understand why they'd want Devin Jackson to do it as well. It just kind of seems like, based on how often we're hearing from Bryce Boettcher in media appearances compared to Devin Jackson, you'd think it's going to be him. So I look at what he was able to do last year and say, yeah, he's got to have the production, but he's got to take on the leadership aspect of that as well, because Jeff Bassa was at the center of the defense making all the calls, and we saw at the end of the year how that wasn't always running as sharply as Oregon perhaps would have liked, because they were struggling with tempo and communication. And you have a couple of guys on the defense who, more than anybody else, your starting interior defensive lineman, who I'm about to get to and talk about, Amari Washington, you don't have to have them, kings of communication, right? It's far more important to have one linebacker and one defensive back that are keeping everybody in line, getting in order. So hopefully they're able to improve in that aspect, because everybody else will have watched the Penn State and Ohio State games and say, boy, we just got emotion on every play and run with a little bit of tempo, and Oregon's defense isn't as effective, because they were dominant for most of the year, but they had a couple of lapses at the end of the season. And of course, Ohio State's offense on October 12th was really good because they were an incredibly talented team. Obviously, they won the national championship, but Oregon's defense struggled with those two things consistently. That's got to improve. that falls not entirely, but I think heavily on the ability of Bryce Boettcher to be a leader on the defensive side of the ball. The other guy who I think has to be really good is Amari Washington. And I love saying that because I am, of course, chair of the Amari Washington fan club, and I fully expect him to be one of Oregon's 2 starting interior defensive linemen. He didn't have a ton of production statistically last year. That's where he's got to make a jump. Because Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell were really, really good. And they also put up the numbers. Now, Washington has flashed glimpses and made impact plays. He had just 10 tackles last year. 1.5 tackles for loss. Does not have a sack registered in his career. He had 2 pass breakups a year ago. It's something Oregon's defensive line was really good at. Washington did generate 14 pressures a year ago, which is a pretty solid number for your number 3 defensive tackle. He had a pass rush grade, according to PFF, of 72.4, only 54.3 against the run. So maybe, at least in their view, that's the area where he can improve the most. But you look at what void he and Bear Alexander are stepping into. I could do this exact same segment and apply it to Bear Alexander as well, who's more experienced than Amari Washington. I think Washington might have a little bit more upside, but have we seen the full potential of Bear Alexander in his career at Georgia and USC? I'd argue probably not. So hopefully both guys are able to have the best seasons of their career, because Oregon needs it, or else you're going to have an area that's not just a drop-off from last year, but a significant drop-off, because Harmon was a monster last year, and Jamari Caldwell was no slouch. Caldwell graded as the number 48 interior defensive lineman in all of college football per PFF. Harmon was 22nd. Harmon had an 83.9 overall grade, 80.5 against the run, and 86.3 as a pass rusher, which is hard to find on the interior, but that's why I love Amari Washington. That's what he does best right now. That's where his impact has shown up the most so far. I look at what Derek Harmon brought to the table last year and say, man, there's a lot of production to fill. He had 10.5 tackles for loss, 5 of which were sacks. So, I don't like that. I don't like the way that stat is. I wish it were 5 sacks and 5.5 TFLs. But he had 3 games, Derek Harmon did, where he made multiple plays behind the line of scrimmage, and 3 outlets had him as a second-team All-American, and he was second-team All-Big Ten. Against Ohio State specifically, game where he literally took the ball away from Quinshon Judkins, he had a 95 run defense grade against Ohio State in that wonderful, beautiful day at Autzen Stadium. So the shoes that Amari Washington and or Bear Alexander are working to fill are just so substantial with Caldwell too, but specifically with Derek Harmon. And I'd love to see Amari Washington going into his 3rd year live up to the recruiting potential that, we saw from him a couple of years ago when he was a part of that 2023 class. But this is no longer Oregon would like to see him do these things. This is now an Oregon needs him to do these things, or else you're going to have, I think, a drop-off in production from what you had on the interior of the D-line, which I expect at some level anyway, but I'd like for both Washington and Alexander to mitigate that as much as possible. I don't expect either one to play themselves into being a first-round pick the way Derek Harmon's probably about to be, but I do think both guys can have the best seasons of their careers, and the potential that they have shown and flashed now needs to turn to production. So Bryce Boettcher, Amari Washington, big parts for this Oregon defense in 2025 if they want to get back to the playoff. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, all of that good stuff. What is culture? Oregon's, I think, is very good. A discussion on that particular word is coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day, you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. You want peace of mind as a parent? Of course you do. You want to make sure your family's financially protected no matter what happens. Fabric gives you that peace of mind. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company. Not available in certain states. Price is subject to underwriting and health questions. Check them out at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege, of course. And then you want to check out Prize Picks. You know why? Because baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash, whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs. Prize Picks keeps every game exciting. It's fast and simple. Setting a lineup takes less than 60 seconds, and when you win, your payout is quick, safe, and secure, which is a pretty elite trio. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. For my everydayers out there, were you looking for more with Brian Smith? Well, you're getting more with Brian Smith.
Let's talk a little Oregon culture. One thing that I've been fascinated with is Oregon probably pays more than anybody, especially when they're recruiting in the South. They're not going to get Southern kids. I live down here to go all the way out there and pay the same as most of those schools. That's most of the time. Their locker room seems to be good. They were undefeated last year. There doesn't seem to be any complaining going on. What is it with the culture? Before we get into the NIL/portal stuff, how does that work? Why is it so good under Atlanta? You got any stories or any background for it?
Well, I think you touched on it in our other segment where it's not just about NIL. Oregon, I never try to, sugarcoat or hide the fact Oregon's a tier 1 NIL institution in modern college athletics. They are rarely going to get outbid unless they truly don't think that a kid or a particular position is worth what someone else is willing to pay. But typically, it's an old school way to lose a recruiting battle if Oregon doesn't get someone. Typically, like there are a select few number of examples out there, but for the most part, Oregon's able to pay what kids are looking for, and that's an absolute benefit. It gets twisted into a negative by fans of other teams. A lot of the times I deal with that sort of interaction a lot. Like, oh, they just have all the money. Like, yeah, that's kind of yeah. And Josh Pate made a great point about this one time, that anytime someone, craps on Oregon because of Nike, Lanning's just got to sit there and go, thanks for promoting my program for me. Yeah, we're Oregon. We have Nike. If you are concerned or you're wanting NIL opportunities, we have that for you here. But that is not the only reason anyone ever goes to Oregon. I'm sure there have been some kids that have. I don't know who's who. I do know, and Lanning flaunts this regularly, as he should, because in today's world, it's pretty darn impressive. In his 3 full seasons with the Ducks, they are yet to lose a starting player to the transfer portal. They have not lost one yet. Now, will that go on forever? I don't know. But I know that Georgia just had their quarterback hit the portal, and that's one of the best programs of the last 20 years.
Damon Wilson also left, too, their best pass rusher.
Yeah, like it is really uncommon for that to be the case. And I think it speaks to, yes, Oregon is highly competitive in the NIL space, and they can focus on when Ohio State does it, it's like, oh, they're doing the right thing. But when Oregon does it, oh, Nike, Phil Knight, boogeyman bad, no good, very bad Oregon. So I think that what Oregon has also done a good job of is presenting kids with a very clear path of what their expectations are. There are kids on the roster right now, Brian, that frankly, in the spring portal window, I won't be surprised if they end up leaving, but I'm still kind of surprised they're around to some degree. Just because they've been around for several years, they're good enough to see the field, but they're not. But guys tend to stick around. That's not to say Oregon hasn't had players transfer out of the program and go have success. Harrison Taggart a couple of cycles ago, he's now at BYU. He's having a great career with the Cougars. Dante Thornton went to Tennessee. He's probably going to get drafted in the NFL this year. He was a good receiver for the Vols for the last couple of years. Like there have been examples like that, but there hasn't been a player transfer out where you go, wow, this is some big giant need all of a sudden, because he was going to be a start. He was going to be an 800-yard receiver. Those guys have stuck around, and maybe it's whatever is in the wonderful Oregon water that is in Eugene and everywhere that I'm a big. Some people think I'm crazy, for bringing this up. Water does not taste the same in every state. It doesn't.
No,
Oregon
it doesn't.
water. Thank you. I'm glad you agree, Brian. I'm really glad you agree.
Go to Florida. Look, it's not good.
Go to California. I can't drink the water that comes out of the sink there. Heck, I live in Utah and it's got to go through a Brita filter for like straight out of the tap. No, not doing that. Anyway, so there's something about what the coaching staff communicate to players that resonates with them to trust and believe, hey, if I stay here and stay the course, I'm going to see the field. I'm going to have that opportunity and have my moment to be a major contributor. So I think the staff, to your point, are really good at building relationships, and that should not go overlooked in a world where NIL and the portal are a thing. And they often go hand in hand where, hey, you're in the portal, we can offer you this much money. I also know, and I wasn't the one that reported this. It was somebody else. I forget who. I could look it up if you want me to confirm or think I'm just pulling stuff out of my rear end. I assure you I'm not. But someone had reported that Dylan Thieneman actually had bigger financial offers. Certainly he got plenty of money to go to Oregon. Not trying to argue that. But he had reportedly bigger financial offers to go play in the SEC, decided to go to Oregon instead. What's that about? Relationships and probably brand power too. I think there is something to Oregon's different, Oregon's cool, Oregon's flashy. Some people are really drawn to that. I mean, there are Duck fans who didn't necessarily go to U of O that are all over the country, they're all over the state of California, or, you know, I've got listeners on Locked On Ducks that are in New York, Texas, all over the place. And I think there's something about that also has to be alluring for guys to go play. And it also doesn't hurt that since Dan Lanning got there, they never won fewer than 10 games. I don't think that's a bad selling point either.
Oh, that's a really good one.
Yeah.
That's a nice ending point.
I think kids like winning. As a competitive person myself, I prefer to win. That's just me.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that, my friend. In regards to that, we're getting down to the nitty gritty with Jared Curtis. I just want to throw this in there. Do you think Oregon has to make, I've heard the offer for Oregon is substantially more than Georgia. Georgia's not a top tier. That's not because they don't have it. That's because Kirby doesn't like it in terms of like it's a different personality thing. And it is what it is, but it's closer. So I always kind of thought he would go to Georgia. I've been around Jared. He's a nice guy. And he's from a blue collar family, a Christian family in Tennessee. Do you think they would go all in? Because you and I have talked about this before. Not like their depth chart at quarterback stinks by any means. Even after Dante, they're in a good spot. So do you think the culture wins out, or they got to really overpay to get him? I just want to make this a point before we go into the portal.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up his background, because that affects a lot of these decisions as well. Some guys are going into the portal or coming out of high school saying, who's going to write me the biggest check? And
right.
I know that people don't like that because it's not typically what college football has been about and what high school recruiting is. And I understand that sentiment. I also understand if you don't come from a place of significant or stable money and suddenly you can, get $200,000 a year, whereas that place was only going to offer you 50, that might be more money than you've ever seen in your life, depending on who you are. Now, I don't know Jared Curtis's parents. I don't know Jared Curtis personally, but I mean, that is, I think, a decision for him. I don't get the sense, based on everything that I've heard about Oregon and the coaching staff, and also what they've been able to pull off on the recruiting trail in the last several years, that the only thing he would see as appealing with the Ducks is NIL, and that it's bigger than Georgia. I think there have to be other considerations there, and the comparison between the two programs. Look, Georgia's got plenty of off the field issues right now that also don't relate to him necessarily. I mean, that I think you've made this point on my show before. That might be something that drives the parents away more than it drives Jared Curtis away. Because what's Jared Curtis most concerned about? In no particular order. How much am I going to get paid? When am I going to play? Who's going to develop me? What kind of talent can you put around me? What's my path to the NFL? What are the parents most concerned about?
Can I see my kid quickly? It's always distance is a quick one.
That
Is my
one.
kid safe.
Yeah. Are you going to take care of my kid?
100%.
That has to be, no matter who the parents are, there's no way that concern ever falls outside of the top two. Are you going to take care of my son? So if that conversation gets elevated, and I don't know why Kirby Smart hasn't been able to figure out in the last several years, I don't know if Oregon uses that as negative recruiting or not. It's gone on long enough at Georgia that it's not something that can be ignored. You can't just say it's not on their minds or Jared doesn't know anything about it. No, he's heard about it. It's just a matter of whether or not it matters a ton to him or to his parents, where I think the most negative aspect, I think, could be the parents, because it has continually happened and there have been so many problems. But at the same time, from a parental standpoint, like, hey, we raised this kid. By all accounts, he's a good guy. And those other kids have made those mistakes. But our son isn't going to do those sorts of things, even if given the opportunity. So that's the other side of the coin that could come into it too. But, a good selling point for Oregon, at least as long as Will Stein is there, he's put together back-to-back Heisman Trophy finalist quarterbacks. Nobody else in college football has done that. Not a single other person. So as long as Will Stein is there, I think that is a strong selling point too.
That is a very good point. And that leads to this. To finish up here, we've talked about this a little bit. What position or positions, if you had your druthers, would they add a player in the portal from the spring window, which I think is April 16th is when it opens.
15th or 16th, yeah, middle of the month.
If you had to pick one or two, what would it be and why?
Well, linebacker is the easy first one for me, because you've got two high-end guys in Bryce Boettcher and Devin Jackson who are veterans or on the defense last year. I think you're really good with those two at linebacker. After that, you do not have a single player that has ever even been a rotational guy in Power 4 college football or Division I college football, for that matter. Now, you have a trio of redshirt freshmen who are really talented, and who Tosh Lupoi, defense coordinator, has said, NFL traits, we just got to get him, moving in the right direction. And then you've got Jerry Mixon, who's going into his third year already with the team. Wasn't a super highly touted recruit, but has been around, and he's one of those guys that I could have seen transferring out by now. He's waiting for a reason. He's still here for something. Maybe it's he doesn't love his long-term prospects and Oregon's as big of a school as he's ever going to get to, or does he know, hey, this is my time to shine? But if they go through spring ball and determine, don't know if the young guys are quite ready, don't know if Mixon's, or if they just want to have a depth piece. I mean, you need 4 linebackers, at least 3, but really you need 4, because I would hate to be in a situation, if you're the Ducks, where one injury to Bryce Boettcher or Devin Jackson has you relying on someone as a starter who's never played meaningful snaps over the course of a season.
Yeah, I don't see that being what ends up happening.
So that'd be number one. And then number 2, there are a number of different spots. They kind of already added a veteran defensive back, Kennedy, the guy from Ole Miss, who's fine. He's fine. Maybe they add another roaming safety to pair with Dylan Thieneman on the back end. Maybe. But I think the second most likely position, honestly, it could be offensive line. Because
they're just hard to find. That's the only thing.
Not as a starter, as a depth piece.
Okay.
I know who their first 5 are going to be. But after that, Janoris Wilson's a backup. Davey Uli's a backup. Okay, that's 7. That's a good number. That's a good number of offensive linemen. You're like one injury away from suddenly being a little thin. So maybe that, but I think linebacker's the only one I'd describe as a need. See, everybody wins when Brian's here on the show. I'm hoping Oregon basketball is going to get some wins in the transfer portal here. Lots of options, a big, literally, option to know about. First, this episode brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. Daylight savings snuck up on us again, and if you're feeling that lost hour of sleep, 5-Hour Energy has your back. The extra sunshine means more time for fun, but Sometimes you need a little boost to power through, whether you're staying up late watching the NCAA tournament, squeezing in a round of golf after work, or just trying to keep up with your busy day. 5-Hour Energy gives you that quick, refreshing pick-me-up whenever you need it. Extra daylight, extra activities, more things to power through. 5-Hour Energy is a great way to power through if you're feeling just a little bit tired and you need a little pick-me-up. Boom, 5-Hour Energy is there for you. Head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, or peach mango, my personal favorite. You can even build your own 12-pack or 24-pack delivered right to your door. Need one now? Grab a 5-Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. They're everywhere. They really are. I pick them up all over the place. Stock up today and stay energized with 5-Hour Energy.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
I said it on yesterday's show. It's still going to keep being true until the players roll in. I'm frankly getting more intrigued by the day about who Oregon's going to add in the portal for men's basketball, because Dana Altman needs guys everywhere you look. They've brought in Devon Pryor, the small forward from Texas, a promising but unproven player. Jackson Shelstad, KJ Evans, haven't announced anything. Bam Tracey gone. Nate Biddle, 50-50 on whether he's coming back. He declared for the draft while maintaining his college eligibility. So one guy they're looking at, speaking of Nate Biddle, is Austin Rapp, who is essentially new Nate Biddle. And I think Rapp is someone who the Ducks could realistically want to add whether Biddle comes back or not, because they're currently short on bigs. Now, they're also taking a look at Paul Mbia. I'm just going to refer to him as Paul, the 6'10 Frenchman, who I believe is a native of Congo originally, and Folly Dante vibes right there. 6'10, imposing force, dominates around the rim, a lot of rebounds, a lot of block shots. But Rapp is a Nate Biddle mold sort of guy. He is taller, a little bit more wiry, not, a thick, bulky, imposing threat. He was with the Portland Pilots this past season, who have not been a good program in the WCC basically forever. I don't know what's wrong with their men's basketball program. They can't get it together. Their women's team is good. Their women's soccer team is really good. They just can't figure it out on the men's basketball side of things. But Austin Rapp is the reigning WCC freshman of the year, and he has drawn interest since going into the transfer portal from Clemson, Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Oregon. So he very much fits the Biddle mold. This past season, he was just under 14 points a game, 6.5 boards, which is solid for a guy in the 7-foot range. You'd maybe like to see that number be a bit bigger, but 2.5 assists, 1.5 blocks per, and there's a guy who stretches the floor. So the only freshman in the country last year who made more threes than Austin Rapp is Trey Johnson, who is a one-and-done from Texas. He's a small forward / shooting guard who's about to go be a lottery pick in the NBA draft. He made 83 triples, hitting his shots from beyond the arc at a 35% clip. So that fact would make a lot of sense stylistically for a Nate Biddle replacement, or if you wanted to have, a Nate Biddle kind of adjacent player to bring off the bench when Nate Biddle rotates out of the game, then Austin Rapp could make a lot of sense. Certainly, though, I don't know the big men situations at the other schools that I mentioned, Clemson, Iowa, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And, those are some pretty solid programs to be looking at right now. Clemson, Elite Eight last year, got bounced in the first round by McNeese this season. Iowa's just hired just hired a new coach. Michigan with Dusty May just went to the Sweet 16, lost to Auburn. And then Wisconsin, Sweet 16, I think it was Sweet 16 or Elite Eight. And then Wisconsin, we know, is a perennial NCAA tournament team. So, some pretty heavy hitters they're going after Rapp here. Oregon can throw that tournament cachet into the fold, of course. And this is why, when I talk about the momentum that Dana Altman has built in the last couple of seasons, it's this sort of player that I think this helps you at least be in the mix, or at least not be negatively recruited against. Imagine if Oregon had missed the tournament the last 2 years and you were trying to go up against Michigan, who in their first year with Dusty May as the head coach went to the Sweet 16, or Wisconsin that goes to the tournament every year, or Clemson who went to the Elite Eight 2 years ago. I think being able to go to players in the transfer portal and have proof of concept of what you're pitching them on, of, hey, we feel like you can come in and help us and continue this run of getting to the NCAA tournament every year. This is where I think that helps a pretty good amount. I don't think as much for international players, just because they might not be as connected or dialed in to what happens in America's college basketball tournament every year. Doesn't mean they don't know or that it doesn't help. Certainly it does. But I think that for a player like this, you get into the fold for the WCC Freshman of the Year more easily when, yeah, you're a West Coast-based school. It'd be going from Portland down to Eugene. That's a much easier trip. But if you have the ability to go to them and say, we've been to the round of 32 the last couple of years, I think that carries at least a little bit of weight to it from a recruiting standpoint. But as I've mentioned before, Oregon's going to be super busy in the portal because they're going to have tons of needs. And I could see Rapp coming in and starting. If Nate Biddle moves on, I could see Rapp coming in and being a guy who comes off the bench. And the WCC is a good league. It's been a good mid-major league for quite some time with Gonzaga and St. Mary's. BYU used to be in there. And my alma mater, Santa Clara, is in there as well. But I think that the decision for Rapp might come down to, whether or not he's going to start over here or whether or not he expects to start or if he's, wanting to be more of a rotational guy. Because going from the WCC to the Big Ten, there's a jump. There's definitely a gap. Doesn't mean it can't be made, but there's definitely a gap in size and competition there. I don't think he would step in and just replicate his numbers 1-to-1 if he were to go to a Big Ten school. But we'll see where that goes. I just look at, his style of play and say that's very Nate Biddle-esque. And certainly, if he were to start at the 5 paired with KJ Evans, I think those two could make it work. And it makes for an interesting dynamic offensively. So that's the first guy to know about. Second guy to know about is Braden Burries. And this is the, I believe, highest rated uncommitted player in the class of 2025. Jamari Phillips was a late add to Oregon's recruiting cycle last year from the high school ranks. They do have one player in this 2025 class, a shooting guard by the name of JJ Frakes, not a super highly touted recruit, but certainly promising, 6'5", like kind of wiry, 180 pounds or so. Burries is different. So he's a combo guard from San Bernardino, California, which, fun fact, is where my brother's team that went to the Little League World Series when they were 12-year-old All-Stars played their regional, and I believe they still play the regional down there in San Bernardino. But he is a composite 5-star. 24/7's got him as a 5-star recruit, one of the top 15 players in the country. Pretty consensus on that front. He is looking at Oregon, Tennessee, Alabama, and Arizona. So again, all teams that are in the tournament each of the last couple of years, or regularly so. And, Bama is a red-hot program right now. Final Four last year, Elite Eight this year. Zona, of course, just beat Oregon in the Sweet 16. Tennessee was in the Elite Eight this year as well. He's 6'4", 200 pounds. So this is a different style of player than, maybe what you're getting with Devon Pryor, the Texas transfer, who's like 6'7", 180 pounds. He's thinner, skinnier, a bit more wiry. Burries is a little bit bigger. The scouting report, he was on the McDonald's All-American roster. The scouting report on him is that he's a big-bodied, 3-level scorer, not a bursting sort of guy, but plays with a slower pace and has a good mid-range game that can continue to develop and be great. His three-point shooting, okay. 30% was what the 24/7 scout had listed about him, and he'd been struggling from 3 in the last couple of events I think that he'd played in. 83% at the free throw line, always love that, but certainly not someone you think comes in and is a sharpshooter. But if you were to bring in him and Austin Rapp, at least you'd have a couple of 30-plus three-point shooters. But, Burry's doing it at the college or at the high school level now. I doubt his percentages would 1-to-1 translate to the college game. He's not super quick, but scouting report says that he is an engaged defender. We know that matters a lot for Dana Altman. They're looking for a TJ Bamba replacement. Size-wise, he's pretty similar. Bamba was, I think, 6'5", and in the 200 to 220-pound range. I mean, Bamba's built like a linebacker, really, and so too is Burries. Now, obviously, Bamba was an experienced guy. He'd be coming in as a true freshman, but these are two of the more high-profile targets that Oregon has been tied to in the last week or so, and they got to get somebody. They're going to get several somebodies. We'll see if they get tied to any more names, but these are just a couple of guys that have popped up according to various reports from Matt Prame and others about where Oregon is looking in the transfer portal and their needs. I think you need a backup point guard right now. I'd say even if Biddle and Evans return, you need a starting shooting guard. Is Devon Pryor a bench guy or a starting guy? I don't really know, but without Bam Tracey, you need another kind of small forward guard guy who can shoot the basketball. You need a backup big, and then you probably need 1 to 2 other players as well. So there are going to be a lot of needs out there. Oregon's going to get busy, but I'd say that between these two guys, Rapp is probably the higher priority for me just because he's a more proven commodity and he's a big, which Oregon badly needs with, Biddle's decision up in the air. But frankly, there's a reason they've been tied to both because Oregon's got a lot of needs. So the portal recruits are going to roll in for basketball at some point. The high school recruits are going to roll in for football at some point. It's a matter of when, not if. And that's the optimistic note that we end this week of shows on. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.